Lepofsky is an author, university lecturer, retired lawyer, husband, father, and to many across Canada, a champion of accessibility and inclusion. This two-part feature focuses on the life and career of a Canadian man dedicated to identifying, eliminating, and preventing barriers to the full participation of people with disabilities. Melanie Taddeo, the president and CEO of Connect4Life, helps listeners understand the practices and processes involved in advocacy, valuable lessons for anyone interested in issues promotion or campaign development. David also updates listeners on his lecturing at multiple universities, his recently published book, and his newest venture, a podcast, 3 areas of outreach, education, and promotion which are critical to the types of ongoing advocacy exemplified by David's life resume. This interview was conducted in August 2025 and represents the first in a series of conversations with a spectrum of leaders and champions. The Season 3 focus on profiles in advocacy.
Part 1.
I have a great opportunity to interview and have a conversation with an advocate, somebody that everybody knows very well in the disability community and across Ontario and Canada, David Lepofsky. David, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a real honor to be included.
Now, I want you to introduce yourself because that's the best way, because you know yourself best. So please tell us a bit about who David is and how your journey to become the advocate that you are started.
Well, I'm 68. I'm totally blind. I'm a retired lawyer. Better to call me a recovering lawyer. I don't take clients. I can't take clients because I'm retired, so I can't give advice. I'm married. I've got a lovely wife and a lovely daughter. I am working in my retirement part-time as a law prof, focusing on disability rights. So I'm the visiting professor of disability rights this upcoming year at 3 different law schools, at Western, at Queen's, and the University of Ottawa. But I'm also very involved as a disability rights community organizer and advocate. So I'm the chair. All of this advocacy stuff is volunteer. I'm a chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. We advocate to get barriers torn down facing people with any kind of disability in Ontario and in Canada. And I'm also this year the chair of the Special Education Advisory Committee of the Toronto District School Board. TDSB is the largest school board in Canada. It has over 40,000 students with disabilities or other special education needs. Each school board is required to have a Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC, to advise on what the board should be doing better or differently to serve these students. I've been on the TDSB for SEAC for 10 years. I was the chair for 2 years some time ago. I was chair again last year and this year.
Amazing. And I think, it's so funny because you go from being a lawyer and then you're now going to be a traveling or visiting guest professor at law schools, which is amazing. You're taking what you learned on something you're passionate about. But the advocacy work that you're doing, we've heard legends about David in the advocacy field. So why do you feel that your advocacy work is so vital?
The good thing about legends is they're not true. So let me tell you what I really like. If people want to know what got me started and why I do this and so on, there's a free book I wrote. I wrote a memoir, which I'm going to tell you about. It's a memoir about the first big battle I was involved in, and that was the fight in 1980 to get disability rights and equality added to the Charter of Rights. When Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau proposed the Charter of Rights in 1980, it included a guarantee of equality, but not for people with disabilities. A number of us fought to get that changed. I was one, not the only, not the most important. I was one. And we won. And in fact, not only did we win, but the only right that was added to the Charter of Rights during all those debates from 1980 to 82 was adding equality for people with disabilities to the Charter. I decided, like, too many people don't know the story, don't even know that this was added or that we had to fight for it. And so I decided to write the story. I did it in a memoir, but it's also a bit of an autobiography. It's not only about the fight and how it unfolded, but I tell the story about how I got started, what it was like to lose my sight, and how I got started in the advocacy biz, what led me to do this. And I also talk about what lessons I think we could learn, including things I did really badly and wrong back then, so you could learn from my mistakes. So where do you find it? It's called Swimming Up Niagara Falls. And I chose that title because that's what it felt like. That's what a lot of our battles feel like, but we win them. It feels like you're trying to swim up Niagara Falls. You can get it for free as an MS Word document or a PDF, or an EPUB or an audiobook. You just go to www.aodaalliance.org/publication. That's aodaalliance.org/publications. And it's there, downloadable for free. I want people to read it. If you really need a hard copy, you can buy it from Kindle for about for actually 99 cents, or from Amazon, pardon me, Kindle's an ebook, whatever, a Kindle book, and Amazon's a hard copy. But just go there and search on Swimming Up Niagara Falls. But I want you to just get it for free, and
And
feel free to read it.
yeah, absolutely. I encourage all of our audience to definitely use this, because I think what a great accomplishment. And I didn't even know that about the Charter of Rights. So thank you for doing that, first and foremost. And also, you have now, you're saying back in the 80s. So can you just share with us how the landscape for advocacy has changed over the years?
Well, I have a whole chapter on that
Okay.
in the memoir, but I'll give you the high points. When we were doing that stuff back in the late 70s or early 80s, there was no internet, there were no personal computers, there was no email, there was no social media, there were no fax machines yet. I call the chapter Stone Knives and Bearskins. It's a quote from a Star Trek episode because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But and that's in the footnotes if you want to find the episode. But in any event, we were doing stuff, there was no Zoom. If you wanted to meet people, you had to go into a room and physically meet them. And if you wanted to send out a news release, it had to be typed up and then put in the mail, like the snail mail, and wait a couple days for it to hopefully arrive. So the kind of instantaneous action we could do now for free uh, would have sounded back then like science fiction, kind of like Star Trek. And the other thing that was extraordinary is it was really hard to find out what's going on. So now, if I want to know about a bill before the legislature, I can go to the legislature's website, search on it, download it. If I want to find out what was said in the legislature yesterday, I can download the Hansard and read it. And if it's going on right now, I could even log on to a live stream of it. But back then, there was none of that. You either were there to watch it, or you didn't see it. They did produce a physical transcript, but you had to go to Ottawa to get a copy. And they weren't available like within the hour.
Hmm.
So one of the things I found out when I wrote the memoir was I found out that there were things being said by the Prime Minister or the Minister of Justice about our issue at the time. I didn't have a clue were being said. So we've got faster and easier communication, much easier way to reach people, much easier way to reach the public, and as well, greater capacity, far greater capacity, just find out what's going on.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like asking what it was like to go from Toronto to Florida in the late 1600s compared to now.
And that's a great way to look at it because things have changed so drastically.
The other thing that's changed dramatically is how people with disabilities see each other.
Do share, expand,
We
please.
were in the 1970s and before that, especially in Canada, we were largely seen as beneficiaries of charity. And that means that if you wanted to do something for people with disabilities, you gave money to a charitable service provider. Um, and yeah, there were some instances of people with disabilities who accomplished things and maybe they got some press, but they were considered the exception. Okay. And certainly we didn't see ourselves as rights holders. You didn't, when I was at law school from 76 to 79, I talk about this in the memoir, we didn't hear the word disability rights. You didn't see the word disability in the same sentence as the word rights, if you heard it at all. And this is very different now. When people now have grown up with the rights they enjoy under the Charter, with the rights they've been guaranteed under human rights legislation, with the rights they've been guaranteed under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act in Ontario, the Accessible Canada Act federally, accessibility acts in several provinces. While those acts are significantly underwhelming in how they're being implemented, the fact is people grow up now with a sense that they have rights that should be honored. And your self-perception as a rights holder, that makes a huge difference. Now, add one more layer, and that is, of course, for an example, for people with vision loss, but also others, the change in technology out there, of course, has changed life for everybody. But for people with disabilities, it's just ginormous. So the growth of access technology and the fact that it's continuing to accelerate in what it does for us.
So you
So,
touched on, sorry, go ahead.
so all of those things together made the world back then very different than the world now.
Definitely. So you touched on a few things I want to just ask follow-ups on here. Definitely, obviously, the landscape has changed and access to information with technology, with not having to do snail mail or any of that stuff definitely has made a huge impact. But also individuals with disabilities. Now, would you say, because we know, as you mentioned, some of it is charity, but we have a lot of organizations that work with individuals with disabilities throughout Ontario. And have they, because I know for quite a while, they were really big voices for advocacy, the for advocacy. Has that changed as well as organizations? Or do you think now it's more individuals taking on the role of advocate?
Um, there's several layers to this. The first is there has been, on the organizational landscape, there has been significant growth. So in the 70s, the main organizational landscape were nonprofit charitable service providing organizations that did very important work and in some cases took on advocacy as their roles, but rarely had staff who knew how to do advocacy and rarely had much experience with this. There were some consumer organizations of individuals with disabilities, either focusing on one disability or cross disability. But again, given the limitations of they didn't have Zoom and so on, getting to meet, getting together, organizing a big, huge province or a big, huge country is a mammoth, impossible undertaking. But what's happened now are several changes. I think there's more and stronger consumer organizations. The service providing organizations have done more advocacy and stronger advocacy in the past, appearing at legislatures and parliament and pressing for reform. Now, there's room for debate. There are instances where they've done a really good job. There's circumstances where I would say they could have done better, and we all need to improve. And I'm not sitting here in judgment. I'm learning every day as I do it. But the other thing that has grown now is the capacity for the individual advocate. We now have a situation where if an individual faces a ridiculous barrier and they shoot their own video of it and they put it up on YouTube or Facebook and it goes viral and the media picks up on it, it can make a huge, huge impact. And I'm going to give you an example. My friend Bayan Ziv, who uses a mobility device, was on an Air Canada flight 3 years ago to Israel to speak, ironically, at a conference on accessible tourism. And Air Canada demolished her custom-made, very expensive wheelchair. When she got there, she recorded a wrenching video on her Facebook page, I believe it was, and just talk about how horrific it was. And it went viral very fast. The media picked up on it. I got multiple calls to give interviews. It was all over the media. It had what I call second generation media. The call-in shows started talking about it, or the news commentary shows. Then we had statements by the Minister of Transportation and the Accessibility Minister. Then we had some sort of meeting that those two ministers called with the CEO or senior officials at Air Canada. This was one individual, and she's a tremendous advocate, and she's a tremendous individual, and she heads up her Project Access Now. But this was just one person on one plane telling a story that then resonated, of course, on social media, outpoured all the other people with stories about it. Then came more coverage, and by the way, a year and a half later, Parliament held hearings on recurring airline failure to serve passengers with disability.
Absolutely.
So there are so many instances where an individual on their own can start the ball rolling and have a huge impact.
I remember when she had made the video, and I just was so angry on her behalf, and of course it was heart-wrenching, and the talking about it in everyday circles, not just the disability community, but everywhere. People were just devastated and angered. And so, yes, you're right, that one voice, and that's the power of social media, to get it quickly out there, and the fact that people actually took action. And I'm not surprised you got the calls because, again, they want to hear different people's perspectives, and you've definitely been a strong voice for our community in that sense. And, Maya done so much to help the advocacy field of disability inclusion and accessibility. So absolutely. And again, to our listeners, if you have not learned about Maya, please check her out. And we will definitely share the links and everything in our podcast here, because she is definitely another change maker in this.
If you Google her, it's Maayan and her last name is Ziv.
Thank you so much for that, because I always spell it wrong. And okay, so David, it's like you have my questions in your hand, and I haven't shared them with you, which is great. Just means great minds think alike. But you were talking about the organizations and how individuals can be advocates. As a community, and I'm going to just generalize, and I don't like to generalize, but I am for this question. Individuals with disabilities, with the lived experience going through it, would you say that sometimes we come together and do great advocacy stuff, or do you find sometimes we're not so effective?
Listen,
So,
there are great people doing good stuff. There's lots more we can do. And my goal is to see how much we can amplify this. I think there is huge room for us to rethink the future. So much in society is changing. The way we work is very different than the way it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. The way we study, the way we communicate, even the way we meet, even the way here, podcast.
yes.
25 years ago, nobody would not, if you use that word, they'd think you about a teapot. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Things are changing, and the best thing to do is to look at the past and say, hey, are there ways we can do it differently in the future? And I think the future of disability advocacy will include more of the same, but is going to include something really different. And I want to tell you what my sort of vision is of it at this point.
Please go ahead.
Um, I see the old way of doing it is forming a cross disability coalition, possibly like the Association of People with Disabilities of Toronto or Kitchener or whatever organization, whatever community, and then getting together and deciding what issues should we work on and electing a board and maybe getting a grant or doing some fundraising and so on. And then figuring out what the priorities will be and then going and advocating. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying the organizations that are operating that way shouldn't be there or shouldn't continue. They absolutely should. But to me, the future is going to be different. And it's going to be different in two ways. One is I think we can be the most effective when we form an ad hoc group to advocate on a single issue, rather than a broad coalition that then has to debate over priority. There's way too much to do. There's always going to be too much to do. But if you get like-minded people together on a particular issue, it may be, why don't we fight for a Disabilities Act? That's what happened in 1994. And the story of how that got started is also at that same link, aodaalliance.org/publication. I've got a publication that tells the first 8 years of that story. I want to write the rest of it. It's just, I don't have time. I'm too busy living the next battle to
Well,
fight
in
the
this,
past ones. But here's the thing. We didn't come together and have a debate, should we fight for a Disabilities Act? We were not a cross-disability movement that, or coalition or organization that said, well, we've got 10 things we could fight for. Should this be one of them? This was a group of people who just said, we want a Disabilities Act. If you want to join in, join us. We don't.
Yep.
And initially, there were a lot of people who were skeptical or whatever, and that's fine, and I don't fault them. But as we picked up momentum, more and more people joined, and here we are today. We won the act. Some other provinces followed. The government's doing a lousy job, but we're keeping the heat up. But the idea of coming together over an issue. And the second thing is it doesn't have to be an incorporated, funded organization. The AODA Alliance has no money. We have no bank account, and we're not incorporated. We're actually quite informal and virtual. Okay, and that can have a lot of impact. The third thing I want to say is that the individual in the future could become the catalyst. That's like the Mayan Ziv story, and there's so many others. And the final thing is I want people to think about the idea of, in the future, of disability advocacy startup. What's a startup? In the business community, it's not, going to a big company. I've got an idea. Let's go to Apple and I'll work for Apple and they'll develop it, or IBM. Instead, it's a couple of people come up with a new idea out of nowhere, and they, on spec, they start working on it and maybe get a few people as volunteers to work with them. And then if they can find a couple of venture capitalists, they get a little bit of capital. And I do this stuff without money, but you'll see my point. They get a little capital, then they develop the idea, and then they get more because it looks like it's going somewhere. And then they hit the ground. If it goes somewhere and it gets really good, eventually it gets bought up by a giant. And I'm going to give you a name that you may know that's exactly like that. Waze, the app on the iPhone. That was actually developed in Israel by a startup, got developed the way I just described, and it got bigger and bigger, and eventually got bought by Google.
amazing.
Now, I'm not suggesting we have to be going, we're doing this in the business environment, but I'm just saying that if a couple of people decide they want to fight against, electric scooters in their community because they endanger people with disabilities, or the lack of accessible housing, or whatever it may be. And if 4 or 5 of them get together and give their startup a name, okay, just whatever. And if they then set up a Facebook page and get going and use social media to accumulate some people to support, and then they start blitzing on it, and all they have to do is state what their goal is. We want to get e-scooters off the roads and sidewalks so they don't endanger us whatever it may be. That alone. And by the way, once the startup gets going, no, Google isn't going to buy you, but you might be able to come up with you get some media coverage, and then you go to a number of the big disability organizations, whether they're consumer groups, cross disability advocacy groups, or the nonprofit charitable service providers, and say, here's our agenda. Would you guys sign on, or would you sign an open letter calling on the government to do A, B, or C? And for them, the other players who are really busy with a multitude of other issues, you're delivering them advocacy on a silver platter. You're making it easy. And by doing that, you could well get them joining on. And next thing you know, your little startup of 10 people has got an open letter that's signed by, 6 major disability organizations.
I love this concept, and I really hope that vision for the future is exactly what happens.
You have been listening to Connect4Life, the podcast. Connect4Life is a Canadian-based registered charity committed to eliminating barriers for people with disabilities. Visit connect4life.ca and join us in helping people with disabilities become the champions of their growth stories.